Hello and welcome to episode 5 of our podcast, Too Legal, Didn't Read, from me, Aurelia, and Chris from Tacit Legal. Chris, give us the rundown, the TLDR of what we spoke about in this episode.
So we talked about the kind of growing trend of clients turning to AI before their lawyers, and whether and where that's sensible, where we see the limitations, and really whether and where law firms can or should be meeting their clients kind of halfway.
This has felt like such a hot issue, and I'm so pleased we were speaking about it this week. Let's get on with the episode. So Chris, today we're going to talk about, I think, a really fascinating hot issue at the moment, and that's the growing trend of clients turning to AI before their lawyers. And I wonder if this is rooted in clients feeling they achieve some cost and speed by going to generic AI apps before turning to their lawyer, or maybe if it reflects a deeper change in how clients perceive legal expertise. I've had an example this week of a client I work with all the time. They wanted me to do a contract review comparing the new contract they were doing with one of their customers to the old contract they did with their customer last year. And they ran it through ChatGPT to summarise the changes and then sent me all the docs to have a look at. And actually, the ChatGPT review missed one of the crucial elements that really fundamentally was a key point in the deal. So we had a good laugh as to why, I've still got a job as a lawyer. But Chris, why do you think this is happening? What do you think makes clients reach out to things like ChatGPT before coming to their lovely lawyer like us?
Yeah, I think there is a big difference depending on like the segment of client. Like the absolute easiest answer, I think, is a consumer that isn't earning enough to be using lawyers. Like I feel like I'm not earning enough to be using lawyers most of the time. Like that is a big problem in consumer. Like there's just an access to justice lawyer issue, and I think the same is probably true for very early stage businesses when they just you're barely paying yourself, never mind your lawyers. So I think that's part of it, but I do think that's easier to explain. I think further up, more sophisticated business going to it. I think it's partially like I wonder, like take that example. They obviously knew it wasn't the best idea to completely rely on ChatGPT because they sent it to you afterwards, but they probably were like, I wonder how far it can get. So I think there's a bit of intrigue, maybe. But then I also think it's a speed thing. Like, there is this perception that lawyers are slow, and the minute you get them involved, you're probably going to, wait for at least 2 days for an engagement letter, and then another week for your advice, and then you're going to have to jump on a call and clarify it all. And by the time you've actually got your answer, it's 2 weeks later. Whereas ChatGPT, you get an instant read. But yeah, so I think it's a mix, and I think the consumers and early stage businesses, it's probably a cost thing. Middle, it might be medium-sized businesses, it might be like an intrigue / speed thing. And I think that's probably true in the large corporate market as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the desire for the client was obviously to make me spend less time on doing this legal work, and they thought by sending me a summary would help. The problem is I can't rely on that at the moment. I still have to do that work, so it doesn't save the time. But where do you think these generic AI apps, ChatGPT, where do they have a place? Where do they add value for clients, do you think?
Well, I think if there's genuinely a cost issue, like an access to lawyers issue, then I don't see it as being harmful. Like they're not, it's better than nothing. Like if the alternative is we don't get a lawyer involved at all, we don't have anyone sense check it, then actually, you know what, passing it through ChatGPT or similar, it's better than nothing. So maybe that's fine. But yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of like legal tasks, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into them more throughout, but I think it's probably, how your client used it. It's like get an instant litmus test, but just know that it's not necessarily going to save time. So like use it to get a quicker answer that you won't rely on, and
Yeah,
then go to your lawyer.
yeah,
Just enough of a summary that, when you're going into your meeting in half an hour, you can actually talk some sense around it, but you know that you're actually going to go and use run it past the lawyer afterwards. And I do also think there's like a certain an education piece for us as lawyers to say to clients, like, this is the kind of thing that is useful. Like if you do go through, that's genuinely useful to us, but actually, this is the kind of thing that's really not useful and actually probably takes more time. And it's the age old, I always compare it to like the terms and conditions thing from like 10 years ago, where you get a client say, oh, I've gone to our competitor's website and copied their terms and conditions. Can you just make them work for us, please? And you're like, I can do, but I actually have a template which is like 90% good that I know is good, which will probably cost half
yeah.
to just use that instead of that. But I get why clients would have thought that back then, or even still do now. You think that saves, but you don't necessarily think about like, the way a lawyer works and the fact that they've got indemnity insurance and they can't just blindly carry on and take what you've said as gospel. We've still got to review the whole thing, and yeah. So I think it's partially on us as lawyers to educate our clients.
Yeah, and I think it's also to be a part of that conversation and not to pretend that AI doesn't have a place in legal and our clients won't be using it. Our clients are using AI, as are we, in all aspects of our lives. Of course, they're going to be thinking that it has a place in legal. And I guess it's on us, lawyers, law firms, to meet our clients halfway in that and acknowledge where it can help. But I guess, as you say, it's just educating us to, well, where's the boundary? Where does it stop being helpful and actually just become risky? And that's the bit that we look after.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can go so much further than education. You could be saying, well, actually, we're going to put a chatbot together that we train to extract the right information. Because that is half the problem. Like if you put something into ChatGPT, it doesn't know what you care about. It's just guessing what you care about. It doesn't know what information is necessarily relevant that's missing. Whereas a lawyer does. So actually, it's not an expensive undertaking to put together a chatbot, which you could give access to your clients to say, look, if the query is about this, then ask them further questions about this, this, and this. Then do this and produce a summary based on that information or whatever, and then pass it on to me, because that I know will be really useful and will make it easier for me to then advise them and cheaper for me to advise them. That's just one example, but there is more that we can do to meet them halfway. It doesn't just have to be they've got to change the way they come to us. It's as much about as us making it easier for them to come to us in a more affordable way, given the technology that's available.
Yeah, I love that. I think, when I use ChatGPT and ask it quite simple questions, don't really give it much information, and it comes back with this kind of elaborate answer, and I'm like, wow, it knows so much. But of course, it's just made lots and lots and lots of different assumptions for which it doesn't have any wider understanding or context as to the actual issue. And I guess that's the stuff that we bring, lawyers continue to bring to each of the matters that we deal with, is just that broader knowledge, context, nuance, all of that stuff.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you can actually get the difference between a really generic question like, please review this contract, and please review this contract, I care about X, Y, and Z, and you should probably know A, B, and C about my business. You will get a completely different answer that's so much more useful. So I mean, a lot of that is using AI effectively is a lot about knowing what context to give it and knowing what you're actually asking for more specifically rather than generically, and that will get you a much better answer. Which is the difference between like an experienced lawyer and a non-lawyer using it. And even then, actually, I say that, but actually a lot of lawyers probably don't, and I know this for a fact, a lot of lawyers don't know how to prompt properly anyway. So that's not even true. That's actually more of a generic, what's the word? Like AI literacy point, rather than lawyer versus non-lawyer.
Yeah, and you gave us here at Tacit some training on prompt writing, and I found it fascinating because it's not the natural way of presenting information and asking for answers. It's just not. You think you just use chat or one of those apps like Google, and you don't, and it really influences the accuracy and the information that you get at the output. So
I do kind of think it's not that dissimilar to instructing a lawyer though, because like if you think on the lawyer side of the table, when you get an email from a client with a really generic question, you can go down a million different rabbit holes trying to provide a generic answer, or you would go back and say, oh, actually, could you just let me know A, B, and C? Like it would just let me get straight to the meat of it, get to the point. It's the same thing, and then every now and again you get a client that gives you everything you need in the first email, and then you can go back in like 10 minutes and be like, this is the answer. It's the same deal, really.
Yeah. It's so true, and like on that point of probably the limitations of ChatGPT and others at the moment is the lack of legal knowledge that they've got to go and use a resource in order to give an answer. And I mean, what legal knowledge do they actually have, and will they have more? Is this going to be heading in a better direction for clients, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I think there's two different parts to this in terms of like what knowledge they actually have. I think there's one, what knowledge do they have access to, and then how good is their recall of that knowledge, and they're two different things. So there was actually a podcast that came out this week with Andre Karpathy on it, who's one of the founders of OpenAI, since left. But he's a very prolific data researcher, and he'd made a really good comparison in it, which is the best analogy I've heard for this. So, this is really about the quality of the knowledge, or the recall of the knowledge. So he compared it to, the knowledge an LLM has is like if you read a book a year or two ago, and you can recall that the book said something about this, and you can vaguely remember what it said, but you can't really remember the nuance of it. So like there's gaps, and that's where LLMs tend to hallucinate, because they kind of vaguely remember it, and there's maybe they've had a drink and a beer and they're in their pub, and they might fill in the gaps trying to make sure they seem to know the answer. So that's the kind of quality point. But actually, if you then went back to the book, took out the pages of the book, reread them, and then gave your answer, you've got a much better answer. But that's where LLMs aren't great at the moment, because especially if you're relying on the LLM and not its like research capability, it's got this like fuzzy understanding and of what's on the internet, or whatever it was trained on. But then I think there's also a quantity point, and I think this is probably the bigger point for legal, that if you try and Google an answer to a legal question, there really just isn't that much good quality content on the internet for legal. Like, it's such a well guarded moat still. You'll click through to a few different links, and it'll be paywall. You've got to have a subscription to Practical Law or Lexis or Rocket Lawyer or whatever it is to get that knowledge. So that stuff hasn't, a lot of the time that the LLMs haven't been trained on that stuff. So it just doesn't have that breadth of knowledge, which you might for, like, say, coding, where there's like SourceForge and Stack Overflow and whatnot that have been publishing really good discussion about code and stuff for years openly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that analogy of basically AI having the confidence of a drunk person in a pub, probably recalling a story. It sounds familiar, and I guess that's it. A lot, Chat and others, they are really good at sounding like a lawyer, confidently sounding like a lawyer. But unless you know what you're looking for, it's really hard to pick holes in it. But the holes are there, and they do a really good job.
And a lot of the time,
that.
it won't confess to it either. Like
Exactly,
you or
yeah.
I, if we were telling that, maybe we've only had one beer and not four, so we only have slight Dutch courage. We'd be like, oh, I think that's what it said, but I'd go and check that because I can't completely remember.
Yeah.
Versus, 4 beers in, which is kind of where LLMs are when they're uber confident and they're like, no, this is definitely the answer. 100%, I remember that. That's definitely the answer.
Well, at least they could, I don't know, like identify those bits that it was really confident about and maybe those bits that it wasn't. I think that would be really helpful. But just a little like the small print at the bottom saying don't rely on this, but like this really compelling argument that they've just presented to you, it's hard not to. But you touched on that point, comparing it to the sources that coders, well, the internet has on code out there, and how vibe coding has really taken off and very much integrated in a coder's job and does really. Do you want to talk a bit about vibe coding and how we can compare that to what perhaps, vibe lawyering, that could be the future?
Yeah, well, I think that knowledge point is like a fundamental blocker at the moment to vibe lawyering being as plausible, or no, maybe not as plausible, but getting you as far as vibe coding can. And there's health warnings on that, and I'm sure we'll come back to. And there's a lot of takeaways we can take from what's come out of vibe coding, but I'm sure we'll circle back to that. But I think that knowledge point fundamentally limits the capability of, or possibility of vibe lawyering at the moment, just because I don't think there's enough training content available for LLMs. And that's a different story. And this might come back to the question about how can we as lawyers meet our clients halfway, or how can a legal tech provider step in and do that for us or instead of us, quite frankly. But if you gave it the gaps in its knowledge, like you created a legal specific ChatGPT for commercial contract queries or whatever, and you pointed it at a load of knowledge, which is kind of how Tilda works, but obviously for contract reviews. But if you can fill in those knowledge gaps and you can give the LLMs the knowledge, they can understand that knowledge you give it and they can apply it really well. So yeah, there's an overlap there, and that is partially how I think we as lawyers can meet our clients halfway, is by trying to fill in those gaps in LLM's kind of generic knowledge.
Yeah. Just in case not everyone knows, when we say vibe coding, what do we mean?
Coding on vibes, it's pretty accurate, to be honest. So effectively it's, usually they're integrated into code editors, the vibe coding tools. So you can basically open up a new project and say, I want to create an app that, I don't know, I want to create a little forum or something, and you can say I want these 3 features, and it will do a pretty good job at then building out those features. And then you might go, oh well, actually now I want to add I don't know, a content approval feature, so every feature post has to get approved by an admin or whatever, and it will just go away and do that in a kind of agentic way, and you can get pretty far with it. There's a difference between it being in a coder's hands and a non-coder's hands, but a non-coder can get pretty damn far with it, not without flaws, but they can get pretty far. Like you could easily get to like a minimal viable product, something that you could give to your friend and they can click around. Whether you'd want to put it in production's different question.
Yeah. So a person is just writing in actual English, no code, just instructions, and then the AI app just goes and writes the code for them.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, and the quality of the output will definitely, to a degree, be dependent on the quality of the prompts and the person writing the prompts' background knowledge. So, like an experienced coder would probably put in a much more detailed prompt saying, you know, I want you to do it this way. Don't forget to do A, B, and C. Make sure you use, you know, these libraries or whatever. They'll be a lot more specific and deliberate about it, and they'll probably get better code out of it. And I think that's a similarity. I think you could draw that same similarity between a lawyer using it and someone who's never really dealt with the law using it. You know, they'll feed the right questions, the right context. But yeah, so there's definitely similarities.
And actually, should we be, are clients feeling like they're having to use AI tools in order to try and speed us up? Whereas actually we should be looking at ourselves as lawyers and going, well, we should be doing that. You know, we should be creating products. We should be gaining the efficiencies. That shouldn't be how costs and time is saved by the client doing more. We should make it in-house. You know, that's got to be the next client demand, and quite rightly so, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, definitely. And there is the most useful use case, is that the most useful? Let's go with that. The most useful use case I've seen come out of vibe coding, and I've spoken to multiple people about this, and they all find it absolutely brilliant. Is you can take like a domain expert, like someone who knows loads about, I don't know, project management. But they're not a coder. They've got an idea in their head of what the problem is and what the potential solution might be. But trying to communicate that to development teams can be quite difficult. But vibe coding, they could vibe code up a minimum viable product of how it should work, pass that to developers and go, this is what I want. It's not perfect, but can you build something like this and make it better? I'm trying to think how that translates to legal, but there is potentially something there.
Yeah.
There is potentially something there.
Yeah. I mean, could all of this actually strengthen our relationship with clients? Because if we are more responsive and transparent and open to new ways of working, that just knits us closer together with clients. I don't think this is something we should be fearful of as an industry. But it feels like we're at kind of a bit of a crossroads at the moment. And do we go on this journey with clients, or do we seem quite resistant to change, and clients will, you know, go and try and do some vibe lawyering themselves?
Yeah, it all comes down to market opportunity, doesn't it? I think you've got to think about it by segment as well. So if you think like consumer or early stage business stuff, I think most, let's go narrow, let's say early stage businesses. I think most early stage businesses would quite happily pay 20 quid and have a stab at getting something that's better than what comes out of ChatGPT. It might not be perfect, might not be insured, but it will be better than what comes out of ChatGPT. The problem is there enough £20 matters to justify building something? And that's the age-old problem. And LLMs at the moment, they're great if you feed them the right knowledge and point them at a specific use case, a specific task. But that's how narrow those things have really got to be like genuinely useful, I think. So if you can find the thing that, you know, founders want, every founder wants every week from their lawyer, and multiply that by all the number of founders, then that's probably something that's actually worth building and justifiable, like commercially justifiable building. So I think, yes, there. But it's just trying to find those use cases. But I do think there's like I think the biggest opportunity at the moment for law firms that don't want to go that far in terms of actually building like a monetizable product, is just make intake easier. Like, you can make that process of initial engagement and quoting and all of that kind of stuff so much easier. Like, people are like chat windows now. Like, you could build a chat bot that extracts all the right information you need, can provide an initial quote, can tell them what the next steps are, and then can present all of that in a really nice way to the lawyers so they can just jump straight in. You probably knock £500 off the bill just by doing that. Genuinely, like, you spend so much time trying to get the right information from clients at the start that's just easy pickings, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always been the age-old barrier to clients using lawyers. It's just a hassle. It's a hassle getting onboarded and giving them all the information and getting them up to speed and getting a call with them. And like, if all of these things
and knowing
can actually
that whole
make
time before you've even got a gauge of whether they're any good, the clock's running.
Completely.
So, like, do all of that without the clock running.
Yeah.
And then people feel far more comfortable engaging you, and far less friction. And if you do that versus the firm next door, that's kind of, you've got to wait 2 days for a phone call, and then you're going to clean up. So I think that's the really low-hanging fruit in all of this stuff at the moment. But you've still got to have a client that's able and willing to pay for the advice eventually. So, I mean, it doesn't solve the whole problem, but I think that realistically, I think for the average law firm, that's where you could make quite a good return on investment pretty quick. Like, productization is not for everyone.
I think that's right. I just still find it's wild how many law firms are out there with still no real policies and firm-wide understanding of how their lawyers should be using AI, how they should be talking to their clients about using AI, and and what their policy is on these things. And it feels like the more we don't talk about it openly, that probably loads of lawyers are going on to ChatGPT and asking Chat for things, themselves, and it gets pushed into the shadows, and clients will start to find solutions themselves and leave lawyers behind if we don't be transparent and be responsive and keep up with them. Chris, we're coming to the end of this ep, but to close, what one piece of advice would you give clients about using AI for legal matters?
Oof. If it matters, get a lawyer to check it afterwards. I think it's the obvious one. So I'm not sure that counts. I think number one thing is to actually understand what the AI is doing, because I mean, for the comparison example that you had at the start, like, a lot of chat apps, they're using something called RAG for documents. So they're not actually comparing the whole document. They're taking chunks of the document. So they're comparing a chunk of a document with a chunk of a document. It's just not even doing the task that you think it's doing. So, like, wow. I think it's a general AI literacy point. Like, understand what the tech's actually doing, because then you'll understand what its limitations are. I think that's that's the number one thing. Apart from, if it matters, don't rely on AI alone.
No, I love that. I think we've all just got so much to learn in this space, and the more we can be on that journey with clients, the better. And that's what we hope to do here at Tacit Legal. Chris, I've loved this ep. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. Speak soon.
Speaking of it, bye.